So thanks again for coming. My name is Maya. I'm the vice chair of the chapter. I'm a graduate assistant in art history. And so today, as you guys probably know, we're doing a meeting that has two functions. One is to answer questions that people might have about what's in the proposed contract. It's a dense and long document, and it's not assume that people would understand what's in there. So we really want to give people the opportunity to clarify any questions that they might have, so that people have accurate information about what's in there and what some of the provisions were. And also, this is an opportunity for people who are elected delegates to hear about the concerns that people might have about the contract. So for those who don't know, the way that the contract ratification process works is that after the agreement is made between CUNY management and the bargaining team of our union, that agreement then goes to the executive council of the executive committee of the union, who then approves the agreement. That happened, and after that happened, it went out to everybody to see. After the next step in that process is that people who are elected to positions in the union then vote on whether or not that contract should be sent out to members. So we're in this interim stage between when the executive committee of the union passed the MOA and when the delegate assembly will vote on whether or not to recommend that agreement to members. So this is an opportunity again for delegates to hear what people have to say about the agreement, since we're elected as representatives of members of this chapter, and we wanted to have this opportunity for people to express their opinions. So yeah, please come and fill up the seats in the front if you can. So in a moment, I'm going to have people who are on the executive committee of the union introduce themselves. Everybody here knows who they are, but just a little overview of procedure and how we're going to run the meeting. So we're going to have a quick overview of the MOA, just generally, so people understand what's in it. And again, if you would like a piece of copy, you can follow along. There are copies on the table from where you entered. And then, so that's going to take up the first part of the meeting, and then we're going to dedicate the next part of the meeting to a question and answer and speaking from the floor. The way that that's going to work is I'm going to collect a stack here. So I'm going to collect people's names. People will speak in the order in which they're on the stack, and we'll probably have, I think what we're going to do, well, I should say this is what we're going to do. What I thought that we should do is that we'll have 3 people speak, and then we'll kick it to the people in the delegates and people in the front who can answer questions or respond. Okay. The point is not for this to be actually some people who are here as delegates. We're here because we don't necessarily have our mind made up yet about how we want to vote, so we aren't here necessarily to advocate for or against the contract. Right? That's not really what the spirit of this meeting is. People who are delegates, this necessarily means that delegates don't have their opinion about the agreement already, but we're here in good faith. We want to be open, and we want to hear what people have to say. So that's
seats in the front here.
That's the spirit in which we're running this meeting. For people who are coming in late, just make sure that at some point you guys are able to sign in and come back. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Mark and first the delegates are going to introduce themselves. So people around the table wouldn't mind introducing themselves, and then people are scattered around. So do you mind starting with that?
Sure.
Starting this way. Okay.
Oh,
Hi,
no.
I'm Lynn Turner, and I'm in sociology as a graduate assistant now, formerly unfunded. No.
I'm Luke Elliott Negri. I sat on the bargaining team, and I'm on the executive council, and I'm also the chapter chair here at the Graduate Center. I'll just briefly say a couple of quick things to build on what Maya said. One is that this is, if the delegate assembly votes to refer this to membership, the first meeting and not the last, right? So if every single thing doesn't get sorted out in this meeting, we plan to have much more engagement, assuming that the document winds up with membership. It may or may not through the delegate assembly. So just that folks have in mind, if every single thing doesn't happen in this next hour and a half, there'll be more forums. And then starting the minute this meeting is over, I just want to make myself available to folks as someone who sat through hundreds of hours of meetings. If you're like reading the document and wanting to dig in deeper, I'm more than happy to jump on the phone with folks. And then a third thing, and then I'll be done, which is to say that obviously, as there's some documents out there, some people have made up their mind on what they think of this, and I also am one of those people who've now in 2 formal bodies voted yes on this. And so I will do my best to just answer questions in a straight way. If people have questions today, I'm the one who's had my head in the weeds of this. But I also just want to acknowledge, and by way of transparency, I do have a perspective on this. So I'll answer questions, but also don't want to like pretend I don't have a positive view of what we're sending out there, so that folks can have that in mind. So okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Steve Breyer, faculty member in the Urban Ed PhD program, a delegate, faculty delegate to the delegate assembly, and I'm here to listen to people's thoughts about this. I think of myself as a representative, not as a person who has a definite opinion, and so I want to hear what, if you will, my constituents have to say about it.
Hi, I'm Travis Sweat. I'm a delegate here at the Grad Center in the Sociology Department. I'm also an adjunct at Medgar Evers College and City College. My stance is probably well known.
I'm Mark Kagan. I'm a 5th year in the History Department and a delegate and an adjunct at Lehman College.
I'm Roxanne Shirazi. I'm in the library. I'm library faculty. I'm an alt delegate, so I'm on the executive committee, but I just fill in when delegates can't make the meeting, so I'm probably not in a voting position here. So I'm trying to record the discussion and share it out for people who couldn't come today. So that's what I'm doing, passing around.
Sorry.
Susan Fountain, I'm a delegate. I'm adjunct at SPS at School of Professional Studies, and I think Steve's comment about his role today mirrors mine. I feel like I'm a representative, and I'm really eager to hear what people have to say so that I can vote appropriately at the DA.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lee. I'm here delegate at SPS. I agree with Susan. We're here listening.
Anyone else that I missed? Great. So then with that, I'll put it over to you.
So this is very exciting. We've never done this before. And we had just some quick consultation at the start, and it was thought that because Luke has already voted for the contract in the executive committee, that again, it would not be appropriate for him to do the initial run through. I'll say that I think of myself as a probable no, but again, like I'm chewing on things, and I'm kind of seen as the technicalist anyway. So I'm gonna try to do this fast. I'm not gonna do every section of the contract because we want to leave things open for you. All right. So and I'll just talk about page numbers. So as I go through, so the wage increases. I just note that there is no wage increase on the first day of the contract, as might be expected normally. And so retroactive money will not be as big as you might have expected, because really we are only getting 1 year of retroactive from 10/1/18 rather than retroactive back to 12/1/17. Okay, so, but besides that, this is pretty clear. Twos, and the last two comes nearly at the end of the contract, and the contract runs not 5 years, but 5 years and 3 months. Page 2. So here we start to get into adjunct stuff, and the base, page 2, and then through to page 4 is the adjunct stuff. So adjuncts starting in the spring, adjuncts will receive pay credit for every hour that they do as an office hour, and you will get it, and they will get or be required to, depending on your formulation, an office hour for every 3 or 4 credit course that they teach. So unusually about this, that means that someone that teaches 1 course, as I will in the spring, because my load was cut from 2. 1 course who would not normally get an office hour will go from 3 to 4 hours. I'll go in the spring from roughly $3,300 to $4,400. But someone that is teaching 2 courses, who is already getting 7 hours, because they're already getting an office hour, will only go from 7 to 8. In other words, for every 3 credit course, it's now going to be called 4 credits. But if you were getting, as it says, 3.5, then you're obviously going up less than someone who was getting 3. The group that does worst, the group that does best are the people that are teaching 1. The group that does worst are the people that are teaching 2 4-credit courses who are now getting 9 and will go to 10. And every other group falls somewhere in between that range. In fall 20, then adjuncts just get the 2% raises along with everyone else. In fall 2022, there's going to be a standardized rate for virtually all adjuncts for virtually all adjunct lecturers of $5,500 per course. And then you can see on page 4, assistant professors, 6,000, associate professors, 65, and so on. There are handfuls of people that, because they are at step 5, that they are at the top step of the current progression, will be a little bit above these rates. And they will receive, therefore, the 2% raise in the last year, but everyone else just simply goes to these rates. As of fall 2022, steps are eliminated. So obviously that's more beneficial to someone at the bottom, at the first step, and the people at the 5th step, some of them are already going to be at 5,500 or even above, and therefore are not going to really get any particular benefit from the jump to 5,500. Page 5. Excuse me? No, they won't be cut. They'll just get, if you were going to make 56, for example, I'm just making this out of my head, you would get the 2% raise in the fall of 2022, like all the tenure track faculty and all the HEOs. So they go to 50, whatever, 57, right? Page 5 tells us about some additional increments for CLTs and assistant to HEO education officers and lecturers. That's pretty straightforward. Page 6, I'm just going to bounce this over on discretionary assignment differential to Luke for a minute.
You know, if Andrea Vasquez were here, who was on the bargaining team and now the first vice president, she would have a lot to say about this. I'll be brief, but say that so this HEO series differential came about from the fact that HEOs are at parity with every HEO other than the assistant 2 HEO. So there's the assistant HEO, the associate HEO, and the full HEO. They're at parity with assistant faculty, associate faculty, and on full professors, but they are not a promotional series, which is to say, you know, a faculty automatically are considered for tenure and so considered for promotion and move up, and that's not the case for HEOs. And so this demand, part of which was one in the last round, was to acknowledge the fact that essentially HEOs get capped out at the title that they're in without automatic recourse to promotion. And so this is essentially a differential for those who sit at the top of the HEO, you know, kind of, what do you call it, salary schedule within their title, exactly. And so this was implemented in the last round. It worked effectively on maybe, Andre would know better, but on maybe half the campuses. On some of the campuses, it didn't happen at all. And so this change to that system does 2 things. One, it requires consideration in kind of due time, so there is no barriers for the president to basically consider. And so now there's time frames. When you apply for the differential, then they have to consider it within a certain amount of time. And then there's also money applied from the contract to the differentials to make it more difficult, essentially, for community management to deny these differentials on the basis of financial constraints on the campus. So I think that's it. That's a summary of what's in here.
Okay, page 7 and 8, payment for defined projects through stipends. This is about that if you were asked to do a project over and above your regular title work, that you were paid at an NTA rate. And this, but I invite you to read this section carefully, because this changes that, or changes that potentially to an agreement on a lump sum stipend of some kind, rather than working on an hourly rate. Page 9, top of page 9, education technology. There's a lot of issues around this, around the whole creation of the base of creation of work. especially on Blackboard, and especially for online courses, and who has ownership, and what rights do people have that create it. And the union had extensive demands about this. And what I'll say is basically, this tells me that we got nothing, right? And what we got was, you know, some input, which may or may not come to something down the road, but it's worth noting that this kind of passes the buck on this issue. Reassigned time for untenured faculty has been somewhat mischaracterized in oppositional literature up to this point. What happened was that the tenure track faculty had 24 hours of reassigned time to do like work, you know, to write their book, and what's happened is that they now are going to have 18 before tenure and 6 after tenure. And the theory was that with the course load reduction, they actually had more, you know, they were teaching fewer hours anyway, even with the move to 18 than they had been before. And the 6 hours means that they have a little bit of relief after they get tenure. And also, frankly, from CUNY's standpoint, it's kind of a retention rule. Like, why should you stay after you get tenure? Well, we're giving you this too. Pages 9 and 10 are about a pilot program in which at Baruch, in these programs that are listed on page 11, people that teach during the summer, because they have like a year-round program there, that would be credited toward their regular, the number of courses that they're supposed to teach every year. Page 12, multi-year appointments for teaching adjuncts starts at the bottom of 11 and goes on to 12. And the significant thing, the change here is that previously to get a 3-year appointment, you needed to have taught 2 classes, 10 consecutive semesters. Now, if there are 2 semesters within 12 that you could not teach 2 because of, it's about 2/3 of the way down the page, you drop down to 1 because of insufficient enrollment or reassignment of the course to another faculty, or if you couldn't teach at all for medical reasons, that semester would not count against you. You have to have 10 now within 12 semesters. Now, page 13, expanding access to night shift and graduate issues. I'm going to hand over to Luke.
Yeah, so I'll just move through these relatively quickly, but it's really the next 5 issues are the grad employee issues that I kind of most carried sitting on the bargaining team. The first is really a response to the organizing that's been done by folks like Lynn and Alex and others involved in the Full and Fair Funding Group. And so this money targets the 300 tuition-only fellows in the building. So many of us are admitted with 5-year packages, but there are about 300 people admitted to doctoral programs in the building with tuition only and no consistent funding. And so this is essentially, you know, $750,000, whatever, that's targeted to that group in order to get them access to night shift. And so a piece of this, though, is kicked to a committee where we sit down with the Graduate Center management and sort out what the non-contingent employment structure will be so that then folks can access this money and have health insurance. So
it's just important to say that to get covered by night shift, you need in some way, shape, or form to be
employed at
employed.
CUNY, right?
Graduate assistant, right? Or some employment.
Yeah, an NTA, an adjunct, whatever. Okay. And just to say that I think that I'll editorialize briefly, but the creative thing about this is we're essentially negotiating for people who are not in the bargaining unit, which is, you know, a difficult thing to do. And so it's a true like kind of solidarity kind of organizing thing. Then the next piece is what is this? Only one sentence. In some ways, the thing I'm most interested in, because it essentially creates a standing labor management committee here at the Graduate Center where we can address contractual issues with management and essentially create, you know, language that we would recommend to both bodies. We are in a weird situation in that we're basically the only title in the union, the graduate assistants, I should say, that are concentrated all at one campus. So there's a weird situation where we have to negotiate with PSC Central and CUNY Central, but actually many of our issues were local. So this is, you know, kind of setting the stage for future things. The next one is quick and easy. We were previously capped at 5 years of being graduate assistants, and now we can potentially get up to 7 years of graduate assistantship. It's not a guarantee of 7 years, but a potential of 7 years. So before, when you hit, I mean, there's, yeah.
Can we do the questions afterwards?
Yeah.
Just give the information
Can
now.
can I go
Fine.
back and pick this up? Do you mind? If I pick this up here at this
I
point?
just want to make sure that we can finish this
Yeah.
portion as quickly as possible. So we can vote.
Oh, what? I mean, there's two
Okay,
more grad
go-
employees.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
right.
Just give it there.
Sure. All right. Bare minimum. Sorry. So the 270 contact hours basically moves. Currently, graduate assistants can teach a total. If you're teaching when you're in a graduate assistant B title, you can teach 3 courses one semester and 2 the next.
Two is an adjunct and 1 the next. 3 is adjunct during the course of a year. And now you'll be able to teach 4 as adjunct during the course of a year. So you can go 2 and 2, and you can regularize your schedule with your department as you're pitching them why they should let you teach.
And then the final graduate employee, and this is in some ways the cleanest of these, if you're in a PSC negotiated title in year 6 and 7, or in theory in year 8 if you're on an approved leave of absence, no more, like you won't have to pay tuition to the, go to cut a check for $27 to the 8th floor.
But not for international students.
No, it applies to international students. So you'll get the $2,700. So then the difference between that and the international student tuition. So whatever that difference is. So it does. So that $2,700 applies. That's like the ubiquitous fees. Yeah. Okay.
And it would also apply then to the people from tuition only who are then being given some form of employment.
Right.
As long as they have work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, page 15. EOCLT Professional Development Fund. This is more money than in the past, and it adds NTAs to that fund. Page 16, Adjunct Professional Development Fund is more money. Page 16, 17, 18, 19 are new in that they provide a process to observe online teaching or hybrid teaching. Page 20.
Say.
Say it.
I just want to indicate that was a long, hard struggle with it to get the language. I don't mean in the contract, I mean to figure out exactly what we wanted to ask for. I don't know if we got it all. I haven't read it, completely yet, but it's an important sort of thing that limits, I hope, management's.
Right. And it is, I would note, a big ed tech thing in this contract.
Page 20, recognition. This title, postdoctoral fellow, is a way to bring the people that are at the advanced science research sub-center into the, legally and officially, into the bargaining unit. Page 21, all this stuff under union dues and membership is regularizing the contract with the new New York State laws on our right to find new employees. Page 24, notification of employment for teaching adjuncts. Oddly, it used to be that people were being notified that they were being employed for 1 semester were notified on May 15th, and people that were notified that they were being reappointed for a year were notified on May 30th. That made no sense. Now there's a standard date of reappointment notification for everyone. Page 25 down at the bottom, distinguished professors increases the number from 200 to 300 of people that can get a supplement that is off the salary scale.
And a reduced teaching.
Page 27, non-teaching adjunct rates. In the past, the non-teaching adjunct rate was set at 60% of the teaching adjunct rate. And this is basically saying that's no longer going to be true. And non-teaching adjuncts will simply get the 2% wage increases that are common to the bargaining unit as a whole. And that's all I'm going to talk about. There's plenty more, but already I've gone too long. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move into the question and answer, call and response portion of the meeting. We have about an hour left for this part. So As I said before, I'm going to take staff. We'll do 3 at a time, and then we'll respond to the comments in a bunch, or the questions in a bunch. So if you'd like to be added to the staff, can you please raise your hand? What's your name?
Linda Bergen.
You always okay. Sorry. And Andy. Sorry, this isn't working anymore.
Jane over here.
You want Sharpie? That would be great if you wouldn't mind. Oh, here, I got one. You got one. Thank you, Jane. Anybody else for now?
There are 2 seats here if anyone.
I advertised them, they did not. No. Someone puts it. Harry? Anyone else? Okay, so when you speak, if you could just say where you work, what your title is, and then ask your question or give your comments. So Linda, you're first.
Yeah, so I work for SPS. I teach a graduate course in financial management, and I'm an adjunct professor. So my basic pay rate is already above the final rate that is showing for 2022. And the only way I wound up getting an increase is because they added 15 hours onto the calculation of what I would earn.
You teach just one.
I teach 1 class, yes. So is that the intended? And along the way, I would top out above that maximum dollars, maybe in 2020 or 2021. So what happens after that?
So you will, for the entire time you continue to teach here in the CUNY system, you will stay at your rate of pay that is above these negotiated numbers. So, you teach for another 25 years, you'll just keep going up the same way everyone else. But,
You'll get the contractual wage increases,
yeah,
but nothing else.
Right. So you'll get the hour and then the future negotiated raises essentially. And you'll stay at your steps and all of that.
And my second question is, it says in here that the 15 hours of additional time needs to be on campus except for the 3 training classes. So it doesn't give us any time credit for doing homework or papers. And we have to be present for an extra hour a week effectively. Is that the intention?
Well, that is
the language. That's the available for student contact is the language that's in here. Available for student contact. Yes, that's the language that's in there.
But they can say being present on campus.
That's the worst possible scenario, right? Look, people play games, right? But this is the contractual language is that you're supposed to be physically available. Yeah.
I'm available on phone and on email.
Okay.
And do you teach face-to-face or do you teach? You teach face-to-face. That's a little unusual for SPS.
Yeah, one of the only ones. Yeah.
Okay, Joe, are you done with your question?
Joe Ying. I'm from the Misleading Department and working at the Contact College as the academic lecturer. So I have 2 questions here. First question is that, so the contract language, does it distinguish the domestic student and the international or not? So the contract language here distinguish domestic student with the international student or not?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, the basis of this contract are PSC negotiated titles.
Right.
So if you're in any program, but you get in a PSC negotiated title, it depends on what language you're asking about, I should say, because I think some says doctoral students specifically. Yeah.
So they say science student, right? They could be a domestic from USA, and they also could be international student. So the both, if they appointed by certain countries, say graduate system B or A, so they both protect by this contract, right?
Yeah, if you're in a PSC negotiated title, then the language in here applies to you. Yeah, depends on what specific thing you're talking about, because I think some of these provisions say doctoral student in them, in which case it wouldn't apply, right, if it says doctoral student. But the entire contract applies to those who are in a PSC negotiated title, regardless of doctoral student status.
And the second question is that, so I know the science student, the funding situation is different compared to social science. So most of us, we only get funding from the graduate center for the first year, after the first year, everyone has been scattering to the different campus, in Kansas City, for example, City College, Hunter College. So the second year to fifth year, actually the funding comes from their PI, which is the advisor. So I just want to know what's the contract situation for the science student in general, and including the computer science and also the I think the geography program. They have a very similar situation.
So, but what's the question?
So what's the funding situation of the contract language? So which means we still get a 5-year funding situation for the science students, or
you along with the science scholars and GCFs both come in with a guaranteed package, right, of a certain amount of money over a certain number of years, right, and that won't change. And as we know, the issue with science scholars has been that they also have varied guarantees based on what year they came in. But if we take 1 year and say someone might only be at an NTA for a few hours a week and another person might be having to adjunct 2 classes for the same money, that doesn't change in any way in this contract. The differential treatment doesn't change in any way in this contract.
that's it.
Great. So then we have Andrew next.
Andrew Kodak, History Department, 6th year, formerly a GAB, currently an adjunct. Yeah, I suppose my question is, why the fuck should adjuncts go for this? This seems like, I mean, like, delayed pay increases that fall well short of, like, even adjusting for inflation, these are minimal gains at most. Yeah, I mean, this seems like an abject failure for adjuncts. Seems like you're rubbing your face in some shit.
I mean, I can respond to that adjuncts should vote on the MOA and should definitely vote no on the MOA for these reasons spelt out. That, yeah.
You want my answer to it? I mean,
I'd love to hear.
my sincere answer is I was here when the last contract came out, and it was frankly, I remember having a conversation with Lynn about our shock that it was across the board raises, which, as we know, across the board raises increase inequity between full and part-timers. And many of us, including many sitting in this room and up here, put a lot of time in the last few years into making sure this contract didn't come out that way. So in round numbers, this outcome, again, I agree that it's like far from everything we deserve and want. I agree with that. But it plows something like $100 million into the bottom of the adjunct pay scale. It is radically different than the last outcome. So, I mean, I would never sit here and tell you it's enough, like it's not enough. But I also want to provide some contrast to where we sat as part-timers a couple of years ago, just 3 years ago, and where we sit now. So I'll leave it at that.
Why this gap of 3 years?
Can I? Yeah. And I'm saying this as somebody who I am undecided at this point of how I'm going to vote, because I think the grad stuff and, you know, Luke, you know, kind of panel, frankly, is very good. And those of us who've worked on full and fair funding, basically it's mirroring in some ways what our most recent open letter has called for. Even though it's not figured out yet, it provides that potential. And, you know, thank you, Luke, for continuing to keep that on the table, because it certainly was not on the table in the beginning. The adjunct stuff I think is more mixed, but I would just, you know, say something, and it's, you know, I will say that I have the biggest stickler for me is something that doesn't apply for me. It's the flattening at the top, right? That no longer recognizes seniority, right? That I think. I mean, I wish there had been more communication and openness during the whole bargaining, right? Which sort of sets up the idea, right, that not getting, you know, that as well as certain types of forms of campaigns, it's not unusual for a phase-in process in unions to happen. They almost always, as someone who's worked in unions for a long time, they almost always happen that way, right? And I think had there been more communication and openness and discussion, seeing the jump, seeing going from 3,200 to 5,500 would actually be seen in a more positive way than not, people hearing about it now, right? So, that's just my own perspective, although I still have issues with the flattening at the top. So, just to say.
And then can I just say one thing as a technical matter?
Yeah, let's.
I'm sorry. Fine. Yeah.
I know we're gonna have lots of answers to that
Sure.
question.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like obviously the
Yeah.
most relevant and important question.
Yeah.
My name's Rosie Spillicoat. I'm a student at the Grad Center. I teach at Hunter. I'm on the EC and I'm in the DA. I'm also undecided about where I stand on this contract. But to answer your question about why adjuncts should, I think for me, the really relevant question for adjuncts to answer for themselves is how much that extra 15 hours of pay is going to benefit you, right? Like it's an extra grand, $1,500 a class a semester. It's pretty significant. It's not really enough for me to afford childcare and rent on a personal level, but it's also like a good chunk of change and certainly more than we had gotten before. And also if the alternative is nothing, then that's worse. Is that the alternative? If that's a question for individuals to ask themselves, right? Like if you feel like that's not enough,
We don't have to do crumbs.
if you don't think so, then you don't think so. I mean, I'm undecided about it, right? Like I don't know where we're, yeah, so that's my answer. That's sort of what I'm struggling with right now. Is this enough? What's my alternative? Can I actually get more? I'm not sure on a personal level that I'm confident that he can.
Yeah.
And also, I would just say that what you say doesn't have to be posed as a question. If you wanted to say it as a statement, it seemed like the last question was more could have just been a statement. So don't feel the need to pose it as a question.
I think it was a legit question.
It would also be a legit point. I'm just saying that it's just about how it's phrased, not about the content. Jake.
Yeah, so I have two very quick comments and a question. So just want to add to this issue, the broader issue that the budget cuts happening right now mean that adjuncts may not even have a job. So you may not even get this raise because hundreds of classes are being canceled right now for the spring. So that's another issue to keep in mind. The other thing that accepting this contract would do, and I was at this state Senate hearing yesterday at Brooklyn College, and all of the officials, the elected officials and the students, everyone was saying, oh, this is great. You guys have a contract now. We fixed the adjunct problem. So this is going to allow them, if we accept this, they're going to say, oh, it's done. We fixed it. So it's not like, people are saying, oh, we can take this and keep fighting. They're going to say, we're done. We fixed it. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points. My question has to do with the unfunded students. I'm sorry, I didn't identify myself. Jane Guskin. I'm an unfunded student here at the Grad Center in sociology in my 3rd year, and I teach an adjunct at Queens College. So my question is, when I looked at that language around there, I was like, okay, but right now, my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who has a position in the union, even if it's just the GA with no fellowship, is already covered under NYSHA.
That's correct, yes.
So what does this language do in the contract? What does it do? It isn't giving us that because we already have that. So
There are 300 doctoral students without employment now. Now, some of them do not want employment, right? Some of them are living off their trust fund. But there's some, right? But others do want employment and have not been able to find it in one way or another.
I think that's not, I mean, as somebody who's also, because Jane and, we're all part of the full and fair funding, right? And because I was unfunded for all those years until this last year getting something. So I think we need to create that. And we need to create that regardless of whether or not in this immediate term. I mean, and I apologize for not sending an email to the full and fair funding list. I was dealing with a family emergency all day yesterday, right? But not just, so regardless of whether the contract is approved or not approved in the immediate term, it creates a pot of money that I think we need to look at what we are calling for. We need to get a committee together of people, regardless of whether it's approved or not approved, right? Because even if it's not approved, we want to start to say, well, what is it that we're looking for? And, you know, our open letter was calling for guaranteed 5-year, you know, assistantships, you know, and health insurance. So we should use that as the framework for what we're presenting then. Like there's money, and I think we need to then look at what's our framework for what we're going to present to the GC administration, right? For how to make that happen. Not just that people are frozen in where they are right now.
So that, I mean, that's sort of my question though, right? Like I saw the money in there, I'm like, what is this money for? Because already if you don't have the GA, so is that money saying that money will be used to hire these unfunded people as GAs? Because it's not clear from the language.
No.
Okay, so then what is that money going for? It's not going for anything, it's just like a.
Let me give you, it was a pretty weird experience that led to this specific language outcome, which was that there was a political, like, you think of the boss as like the person on the other side who stops you, but sometimes not having a boss, which is what the situation was at the Graduate Center, makes things even more complicated. There wasn't even someone to target, because when we were hammering out this issue and trying to figure out how to negotiate for tuition-only fellows, Joy was kind of a lame duck and not making decisions. Then we were interacting with the provost, who serves at the behest of a future president. So there was like this political vacuum in the building and an inability to kind of clearly actually negotiate. And so the decision we made was to set aside our portion, basically, of the funding to what I would say is abolish tuition-only fellowships. That is the point of this, right? And then the point is to do what Lynn said, which is to sit down with this group, but with money and a formal labor kind of management forum behind it, and to set about doing away with them. So I think bizarrely, if we had had a clear, stable boss in this building, you would see different language here. But now it's like kind of kicking that a bit down the road. And actually, you know, the current, you know, president, who is only around for a year, has a strong interest in getting this done. But then it's this question of, do we have the political power to take what's there and push it forward? So that was the context. I mean, that was just like how it came to be this, right?
So to clarify, so the language in the contract does not provide, doesn't do anything with that money. It just sets it aside, and then the fight that is not provided in the contract that would happen separately is to say, that money that is set aside, we want it to go to hire everybody.
Well, it is set aside for a subgroup of people. I should say that. It's not just for anything, right?
No, but I mean, like, to actually use it would require.
People have to get hired. That's the point. So yeah, we're going to sit down at a table. Hopefully you're sitting at the center of that table and hammering home why this should be the non-contingent deployment structure through which people access that money.
What we saw last year was that 50 activist GAs could make a significant change in the WAC program, right? Like, we have power in this building. And the point of the Labor Management Committee is not 3 people on each side of the table. The point is to create a body of activists here in this building, right? Who now have kind of a vehicle, a mechanism through which to organize and around which to organize, and use this to build political power as well, to do the kinds of things that you actually want us to be doing, Jane, which is building political power in the building.
So,
no, this is a different kind.
Yeah,
This is a different kind.
I
This
think
is about contractual
we need within our
items.
full fair funding to figure out what it is we're looking for.
And then, sorry, can I just add one more thing to this, just for this room, because folks need to decide how they're going to vote on this at the delegate assembly, and then the membership needs to decide. However, this money is getting loosened up in the first piece of it in January. So if we need to start moving now, and look, if the contract gets kicked back, then fine, we've moved forward. But we need to move forward on this demand now, unlike the other demands, like the tuition. It just is what it is. If it passes, it passes. But this, we have to like literally flip into organizing like next week. Like, we need to sit down and then go negotiate it. So okay, we just have to move regardless of what we choose to do with this document.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Patrick. I am a grad B here at the GC, and I've also adjuncted at CUNY College. I have just a couple things to say. One is that I'm really disheartened by what I feel is like some pretty misleading uses of statistics and percentage increases in a lot of the messaging by the leadership. You know, 10.4% raise. No, it's 2% over each year, which is under inflation in New York State. It is the inflation target nationally, and it's way below the increases in cost of living. I've never had a 2% rent increase since I've lived in New York. And so on that front, I find that kind of frustrating. Similarly, pushing home the 35 or 71% increases, I find frustrating as well, because, you know, I taught intro to social science, and the first thing that we teach students is a large percentage increase over a minuscule absolute number, which was what our wages are as adjuncts, is not statistically significant. You can't write a paper about that. And so a 71% increase on what were unacceptable wages, that's just an index of how our strategy hasn't gotten us where we need to be. It's not an index that these wages, even if you're working full-time, you're still under the poverty line in New York if you're working just as an adjunct. Like, I just want that to be on the table, even if it's 71% up. So I think that's a very important thing to emphasize. Also, my brother is also an international student, I am as well. The tuition provision throws international students a bill for multiple thousands of dollars still. We still have to pay thousands of dollars because it specifies it's just for people who can get resident status. We cannot get New York State resident status. And paying tuition, like, this is a number that they make up. This is not like an actual cost. This is a give back. We have to work for them in order for this to even apply. So then they get to deduct whatever amount this is from our wages. And so the fact that this wasn't negotiated with international students front and center is a problem for me. Yes, we would get the same refund as resident students, but for international students, that's a serious problem. That's thousands of dollars that we still have to pay, and that it sort of seems we were forgotten about. And related to that, international students, 90% of the time, we can't work outside of CUNY. Like, these working conditions are our working conditions for as long as we're in this country. And so we can't take up another teaching job somewhere else. We can't take up other sorts of jobs. If we're earning in our home currencies, chances are that they're pretty shit compared to the USA, you know? And so international students, especially if we talk about strike and breaking the Taylor law, we're often trotted out as people who would be at risk. We're already at risk with the existing contract and with what's being proposed in this contract. Like, I already had to live off of an adjunct wage in New York City, and I could barely survive. And I had no choice. Like, where was I gonna go? Like, I worked under the table, but that's all you can do. And so I really encourage people to put people who are in my position at the center of what you're thinking about when you think about this contract. It's not just a choice for us. And just on the topic of, giving up this amount of money. So one thing is that we've been told that we're getting retroactive raises, but the extra office hour is not included in that, right? So we're not actually getting retroactive raises. That is, it's misleading to say that. We have what is being sold to us as the most significant raise in the contract, and it does not apply retroactively to the expiry, in addition to the 2% increase for the first year that we're not getting. And so that to me also is very frustrating, because when I look back, I'm like, oh great, so for each course that I taught, I'm gonna get about a $6 gross check that will then get eaten up by taxes. So a good $4 check per course retroactively. I'm really I'm excited for that coffee, but it's not significant. And to me, the question is absolutely, I still want that $4. I still would want the thousands of dollars that would come if we actually got $7K and retroactive pay. What I see us giving up, and I really agree with Jane on this, is the opportunity of fighting for something better. Because if we sign this contract, that means for these 5 years, we're not getting paid $1 more than then. And if we fight, if we actually build, I know I've been on a negotiating table. I've been a union exec. I've been a union staffer. I understand that it's difficult, but I understand this process is our performance review. If you're on the bargaining committee, you bring it back to us, and we decide whether you've done your job, because as people have emphasized, y'all work for us. And to me, it's signing away the opportunity to actually win, both in terms of the actual just money that we would get, that change in our pocket. Like, I need more, and I need to get more for the work that I already did. And then also just for this thing that we've already seen in the Wall Street Journal, that we've already seen in all of the pressers that the leadership has given, that it's already a settled deal and that the adjunct crisis is solved. We're not going to have the recognition that the adjunct crisis is still there, because even if in 2022 we're making 5,500 a course, we're still making less than any other adjunct faculty in the region today. Okay, what's the example?
A few private colleges.
Okay. So just to finish, thank you very much. So Fordham, for instance, won significantly higher than that from the start and has a contract that goes up to 7K. We have these other examples. We would still be significantly lower than the vast majority of teaching that's happening at the college level. And so all of those things push me to be so, I was expecting, given our strategy, that we weren't going to be going very far. I was still shocked and disappointed by this contract. And if I was on the bargaining committee, I would be ashamed to be bringing this to the membership, because it's our lives. This is our lives. This is all we can do. And so I would really encourage everybody to think seriously about how we can win so much more if we fight so much harder. Thank you.
Question. It's okay, I'm going to move on to the next speaker in interest of getting more voices. So Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Newton. I just, first of all, I think I might have imagined this, but when they were going over the contract, I thought I heard something about distinguished professors getting like a raise.
No, the number of, do you want the answer to that?
Yeah, if that's not the case, anyway, I just wanted to like flag that because I was like,
No, it increases the number of people that could be in the distinguished professor gets you a chunk of money. And
so more people would get more money.
More,
top level.
we're going from 200 to 300 distinguished professors.
Okay, so that's crazy, first of all. Like, that's totally insane. But I just want to let everyone know about my campaign. It's called Thanks But No Thanks, and I'm trying to build power to support 7K or strike, and also let people know, people who feel they can't strike because they're immigrants or not citizens, etc. I want to give them a space where they can imagine what it would be like to strike by refusing a class. I've already done this. I'm an adjunct. And I've been an adjunct in 7th year GC. I'm a ACLS Mellon Fellow, so I'm like top of the game. And like that was a joke, but I've taught at LaGuardia Community College, Lehman College, and City College where I currently teach. I've already refused a class at City College, and my professor, my chair, said basically something along the lines of what Jane said, which is like, oh, cool, well, actually, we'd probably cut your class anyway, so I totally get it, which is actually abusive. That's an abusive thing to say, and I'm not saying that Jane is wrong that this is happening, and I think it's important to consider, but I also want to just plant like the other seed of that, which is that like people use that to instill fear in their employees, like, oh, we don't actually need to. They do need us because we teach over 50% of the classes, sometimes as much as 75 to 80% of the classes. And if you have worked in another place like that pays you an hourly wage, like I have at a restaurant, it's a vastly better job because I put in the time and then I get paid for the hours and they pay me on time. I'm currently filing a grievance for Lehman College because they owe me $1,050 that I have to fight. I have to go to hearings. I'm putting in hours every single day just to get $1,000 that I am like, there's no question that I'm owed it. The grievance counselor has, there's no doubt. So what I want to just, I completely, I disagree entirely that like we should be having this fear mentality, this like shrunken imagination of like, well, I guess I kind of need this money. You don't need the money. You don't need that money. No, I like, well, maybe you need that money, but like we all need money in like a general sense. And I just, it's absolutely ridiculous to be like accepting this in any way, shape, or form. So please visit the Twitter. It's adjunct refusal.
So I'm just going to take a quick pause to add more people to the staff. Can you remember your name? Aaron. Chris.
Anyone else want to be added? And just to keep in mind, we're about halfway through. We can maybe run a little bit over, but we have a half an hour left. So just for people who are speaking, just to keep that in mind when you're making your remarks, to be equitable about the time that you're using. Harry is next.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Harry. I'm a graduate assistant here in my 3rd year.
Stand up, Harry.
Oh, I can stand. All right. Yeah, I'm a graduate assistant in my 3rd year. I'm also an adjunct at John Jay College. One of the first things that came to my mind looking at the contract, this is my first semester I've been above the GA fellowship teaching as an adjunct at John Jay, is the severe limitations on physical office space. And there's sort of the great adjunct bullpen into which we're all crowded. And the prospect of having physical office hours mandated, including for adjuncts like me who are only teaching one class and at this point actually aren't mandated to do office hours, seems to me like it's problematic. You know, for that pure reason of space, which I think probably will tempt the colleges, or at least encourage the colleges, as Jane has suggested, to cut more classes for adjuncts and to cut more adjuncts. And I think that's potentially really concerning. And what's also concerning here, I think, is just the question of basic common sense. I mean, there's no assurance here in the contract, and I would like to maybe know from people who are on the bargaining team whether they sought assurances for stopping the colleges from abusing this office hour in some way. Like, they love getting people to do shitty administrative jobs if they can. I'm concerned that that hour is going to be abused and that we have no potential safeguard against that. So that's one thing that I think is worth raising, which is important. I would reiterate what Elizabeth said and kind of hammer home what Elizabeth said about 100 more distinguished professors, 100 more Paul Krugmans seems like the last thing that we need. And I hope that the bargaining team fought against that, because that to me is a real slap in the face, because we're getting a lot of austerity language here. We're getting a lot of the austerity narrative. You can't afford this. You should be happy with this pay increase, and yet we can afford 100 more Paul Krugmans. Strikes me as pretty insulting, actually. So I think that that's something that's worth dwelling on in somewhat more detail. And then I'll just make a sort of more of a clarifying question, which is that from my recollection, early in the fall semester in 2017, when we were polling grad students to find out the kinds of things that they demanded, obviously 7K was, you know, way above everything else. Tuition remission was very high up. We also had the idea of sort of continuity between your GA role and your potential adjunct role, right? So that the hours that you put in as a graduate assistant, teaching your own classes, doing the syllabus and all of that, would be counted towards seniority when it comes to, say, 3-year adjunct appointments. That seems to be nowhere in the contract, which to me is a bit concerning, because I think I sit down, and maybe a lot of GAs will sit down at the end of 3 years working on a campus, and it's like, okay, great, you know, I've done 6 consecutive semesters back to back, you know, worked my ass off, and this is like, all right, well, see you later, good luck. It seems that demand hasn't come anywhere near being realized in the contract too, and I feel like that's one that could have and should have been in there, because it doesn't sound like it would actually cost people a huge amount of money. So that one, I'm wondering why we seem to see that one fall by the wayside. I think those are probably the main comments that depart from what other people said, so I'll leave it there, but I think those are the main.
So there's 3 questions. Can I just do them before they slip away from us, Maya? On the office hours, it's right that folks need to be on campus, and I think for places that don't have offices for adjuncts, it's like there is an absurdity to that. So that piece, I mean, you're exactly right. Well, in terms of the potential for administrative abuse, there is clear contractual language about what those hours are for. There is clear contractual language. A subset of those hours can be used for specific trainings,
and the rest are for. Bottom of page 2, by the way. Bottom of page 2.
Available for student engagement. So no, you can't be asked to build a website on these office hours. Like, there is clear contractual language that we would read immediately if there were violations of that. So just to be clear about that. On the management demands piece, I mean, of course, like, you know, and again, the point of what gets communicated and when, that's a different question. But of course, the bargaining team resists every single management demand. I will just say that there are many more absurd management demands than what you're seeing with these distinguished professors, including essentially creating people that they can pay as much as they want, who have no tenure certificate and who are in the system forever. I mean, that's their like thing that they would love, to hire the fanciest people possible. So yes, yes. And then to the adjunct, GA to adjunct continuity, this is actually how that shook out. So there is contractual, I should say, there is language in here that speaks to the issue of 3-year appointments. So the very first charge of the committee that gets created out of the night shift money will be to sit down and essentially create contractual language for the application of graduate assistant teaching time toward adjunct 3-year appointments. And then I sat down with the contract and looked at every single other place where we would want continuity. And because of the changes in the structure that come with the adjunct gain, There are literally not other benefits to negotiate for that continuity. The only one, in fact, was tuition. So we could have applied graduate assistant time towards the adjunct kind of tuition benefit. However, we negotiated an independent tuition piece for graduate assistants specifically. So actually, the one thing that was left to negotiate for is actually in the document. So we could talk more about it, but just to say that that didn't kind of disappear from the radar.
I mean, I would add, though, with the office hours, as Harry brings up, that as adjuncts, the reality is our departments ask us to do stuff. We can't really say no to a lot of this stuff, that we have no job security. We see all these classes constantly being cut. We're assigned semester by semester. Department asks you to build a website. How are you going to tell them no? I've had an office hour before. I taught 2 classes in a department. I had to use my paid office hour for weekly team meetings every week. That's not in the contract. I probably could have grieved it. I could have fought back. I needed the job. I was hoping to continue having the job. I think this office hour is indeed very, very dangerous and will lead to further adjunct abuse and exploitation.
I just throw in a really quick anecdote that somebody posted.
No, yeah, I'm gonna say
Maybe at the writing center,
I
you
want
shut down
somebody
the
new to
admin
talk
for
to.
being asked.
Yeah.
I think we need to honor every time, so this is another example.
So Sandra is next. And
Hi, I'm
in the future, I'm happy to add people to the staff, but if you could keep interrupting to minimum, I would appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Cassandra, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. I was like whispering. I'm a third-year student in the English department. I am a graduate. I have a graduate B. I'm also an adjunct at Hunter. I was adjuncting at Hunter before I started at the graduate center. So I actually just want to say that I do think that some of the things, I can tell that there was a lot of work done in terms of the graduate students in the contract. I do want to echo a lot of what has been said. However, I feel like a lot of people have already said what I'm thinking, which is that I'm certainly going to vote no for this if this comes to a vote for us. And I have some specific questions that I guess I don't know how much time I have, but I'm curious for those of you who are leaning towards no or yes, I'm curious to hear your reasoning why, since you are representing us. I know some of you said you're just here to listen, but I think some of you kind of have your mind made up, and I'm curious to hear why. And for those who were at the bargaining table, I'm very curious to hear about what happened to the pay steps for those of us who have been adjuncts for many, many years. And then also just to echo the extra hour. I do this anyway, so it's, and I'm sure a lot of us do, but for me, some of the language is problem. I guess the way that it's being marketed by the CUNY administration is a bit problematic to me, that they're using this as a way to say that this contract is good for students, which is great, and it is good for students, for us to be more available to them, but we are part-time faculty, and a lot of our students don't even realize that. And I think in some ways this adding these hours makes the administration somewhat expect us to function more like full-time faculty without giving us the proper compensation for that. So those are my main.
So can I just summarize what I think that the questions, one being, can people on the bargaining team, people who are up in the front who have either committed yes or no, just to briefly state your reasonings for why, your interpretation. And then second, the other question I think was about the step increases and what happened to those and the rationale behind that. Am I missing any of the other?
Yeah, the others are more just statements.
Okay, great. So maybe we'll deal with the more factual question first about the question about the step increases, and then people who want to speak about their opinions about the contract can do that afterwards.
Sorry, so you're going to answer the step increases,
Yes,
then we're going to run down the row and people are saying where they're at? Is that what the point is?
Yeah, if you have an opinion, pre-existing
Sure.
opinion, or you have come to an opinion, if you could state your reasonings.
Yeah,
why.
and I'm just sort of curious what happened in bargaining, like why the bargaining team agreed to get rid of the steps for adjuncts.
So I think one thing to say is that the kind of operating theory in the bargaining team was drive up the bottom as much as possible, right? So that the minimum starting salary was as high as it could possibly be. you know, in part for the moral reasons that we've heard a lot of people talk about, like people are trying to pay their damn bills, and in part to do everything possible to change the hiring incentives of CUNY, right? Because ultimately we want to see conversion to full-time lines for adjuncts. We want to see hiring of assistant professors. So that was the theory, and so I think, you know, you conceive of it different ways. At the end of the day, like, we decided that a minor compression at the top was worth driving up the bottom, right? So there was a value to that, and we took that and plowed it into the bottom of the adjunct pay scale, right? I will briefly answer why I support this, and I'm partly, like I said, I've already voted yes on it in 2 formal bodies, but like, this is how I look at it. We did not have enough power in the last round of bargaining to do a damn thing for part-timers. I mean, we just got 2% raises. Many of us did like so much work. You know, some of us up here, many of us in this room organized and pushed and fought. And I look at what we have on offer. It is not everything it should be, but it is a measure of the power that we built in the last 3 years. It is very different than the last contract. And in 2 to 3 years, if we keep organizing and pushing and building, then we'll get much more than this, right? But for me, I look at what the kind of composition of our organization is and what the balance of forces are in the state and in the city. And I think, like, this is a measure of where we're at right now. Like, this is a measure of where we're at right now. So that's
Can it. I just ask one more thing?
Yeah.
I forgot are you a part-time faculty or?
I'm well, I was a graduate assistant. I'm a non-teaching adjunct at the School of Labor and Urban Studies. Yeah, I'm a doctoral student who managed to write like a few chapters of my dissertation.
Okay. Yeah.
Should we go down the road? Should we go down the road? Is that what-
Maybe, yeah. Who else, how many other people would want to speak to this issue?
I'll say something.
Okay, if just to, I don't want this to eat up too much
Yeah.
time, so if people feel like they can, if they're offering something new, speak, and then if you could just keep your comments to minimum, so maybe we can go with Lynn and then go down the line.
I'm going to speak even though I really am not I really am trying to decide, right? You know, I actually was hoping that I could just fully say vote yes, to be honest. And I know that my comrades in 7K or strike have a different perspective on this, but to me, it's I also, as somebody, I was a union organizer, right? I've been an activist and organized for a very long time where we struck, right? We did strike. And I've also been doing stuff around bargaining for a common good, which I think that 7K or strike is actually trying to put out that vision. But then I look at what, Chicago, UTLA, right? All of that, right? Those took years in building. So my theory was, that not that we don't settle at all and nobody gets anything until we can build that sort of, and I have lots of criticisms about the campaign, right? Right. So, including not having a strike authorization, but just not having a stronger, more public campaign, So my theory was that that if it reaches a bar, which except for, if it's interesting, because to me, the only bar that I can't get my head around, I can get the less than 7,000 bar, but I have a hard time with the flattening of the salaries, right? So my theory was if it reaches a high enough bar that doesn't structurally undermine things, then, you start and right away you build that power, right? That you settle and right away you continue to build that power for the next round, which is just 3 years from now. Right. So that was where my head was at because of, because I am, and the grad student stuff and all of that is good, but it wasn't just the material things in the contract, right? However, I am undecided because of the issue really of the leveling, because I do think seniority steps matter because it is so hard for adjuncts who don't have a PhD yet to get to the next level, particularly as they are full-time adjuncts, and some people have been doing it for 20, 30 years. So I do, that for me is the, sorry if that was long, but I just wanted to put out my perspective.
Steve, do you want to go next? You want to go next?
Yeah, I don't think I can keep it brief. So I mean, being an academic, it's difficult. I want to say 2 things. I want to say, for better or for worse, and I think for better, we are an industrial union. We have a bunch of different titles in our union. When students at NYU organize, when graduate students organize, they organize singly as graduate students, and that has advantages and disadvantages. So one of the things that in my capacity as a representative, I have to look at the whole bargaining unit. And it's not like I'm unsympathetic in any way, shape, or form to any of the arguments that have been made about 7K or the graduate students need more support. I've been at CUNY for 40 years, and I've sort of seen both the good and the bad of this institution. I would say the other thing that I really think we need to note is Lynn's point. We're not going to win anything unless we build power that's much more substantial than we got. We don't have that power right at the moment. I attended a conference at New York City College of Technology last weekend, which is the CUNY Rising Group. 100 undergraduates. There were no graduate students in that room, and that I was the only person from the Graduate Center there. I was there to talk about the history of CUNY and the struggle for free tuition and open admissions. And I think what we've got to do, one of the reasons that Chicago teachers won is they built ties to the community, to their students and to the families in those communities. Only way we're going to win anything is if we do that. And that, I'm not hectoring here. I'm just saying we have to be realistic on what we can do. So whatever I do in the end in terms of how I vote, and this has been helpful to hear the concerns, which I promise you I will raise many of these when I get the chance at the delegate assembly meeting about the contract. I think we need to have an honest conversation about how you do build power, how you do build ties to communities. The reason that unions of teachers win is because they have ties to communities. They don't win simply on the basis of their labor power or their ability to strike.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a White Sox fan, so very familiar with being told to wait till next year. Again, the same line we received at the last contract that we're receiving on this contract is not heartening. As a member, I will vote no for basically most of the reasons people brought up here. As a delegate, I would vote no in the MOA simply because a year and a half ago, this chapter got together, nearly unanimously decided that we were in agreement with 7K or strike, that we would refuse any contract less than a base minimum of 7K for adjuncts, and that we were calling on the union to begin the strike authorization process a year and a half ago to build the power that we need to win the things that we all know that we need. 1 month ago, the chapter got together and again very strongly decided to organize a strike organizing committee, putting real union resources, putting the means we have at our disposal to, again, building this real power, reaching out to communities to get us strike ready, that we see what we get when we're not strike ready. We see what we get when we're not with a credible strike threat. And in terms of building with the community, just a shout out to my union siblings who've worked with the Free CUNY movement, going to the Board of Trustees, had a big visible protest at the Board of Trustees meeting on Monday, working with students, going in uptown in the neighborhoods of Harlem, calling out the travesty that is how admin is treating CUNY students right now. And that, again, we can start building this now. We have a packed room of people spending their Friday afternoon arguing about a contract. I think we definitely have the capacity to build the power in here now, concretely, not in abstract terms, not in our 7th year of the TSC rebuilding.
So I'm a Met fan, which means that I am eternally optimistic. My hopes are usually dashed, but oh, when we reach victory, how much sweeter it is. I am, as I said, I'm a probable no, and that's just meaning I'm leaving the door open to hearing an argument to vote yes. But you know, as I walked around talking to people for the last few years and thinking about, well, what was the number that would be okay, right? And in my head, I was somewhere between 55 and 6, but at the start of the contract, right? Not 3 years down the road. And I always thought 55 with a path to 7 be okay? Would 6 with a path to 7 be okay, right? And there's no path here. So that's one thing. Patrick points to the disingenuousness of a lot of the arguments for, which is grates on me. Like let's not selectively choose our facts, right? I would hope that regardless of whether the contract passes or not, that there's a large no vote, because that's sending the signal, right? That this is not good enough. Now, as to the little power argument, I mean, we should talk for a moment about the elephant in the room, the unstated elephant in the room, which is Barbara Bowen, right? As long as Barbara Bowen, in my opinion, as long as Barbara Bowen, on the one hand, right? I've watched her. She's quite tenacious in her own way, right? And I can I can certainly imagine her fighting over 3 words tenaciously, right? To give her that credit, but as long as she is president of this union, we are not going to build this kind of power that people are talking about in this room, right? And so in this odd sense, right? Like what will happen? What will happen if we turn this contract down is an interesting moment, right? In which she will tenaciously argue against the kind of building of activity and building of motion that we will need to do better if we turn this contract down. So I have no magic answer to that. I just wanted to at least, raise it as the issue that we as members and we as low-level officers or whatever face daily.
This has been going on for at least 10 minutes. I thought it might
Well,
be
sorry. Okay.
Well, I mean, we were asked what her opinions were, and so we're answering a question. So I don't know.
You get to answer a question for 5 minutes.
I mean, I don't know. I'm the one who asked what everybody's opinion was. So
I'm the one.
maybe you should.
I'm the one running the meeting, so I'm trying my best to give everybody the amount of time to speak. We didn't set a timing for how much people could speak and respond at the beginning, which maybe we should have. But
Can we vote if we want to go back to the stack, or if we want to vote on that, have an executive vote?
I mean, I think we have. How much more time do we have?
Point of
until the
order.
meeting ends?
I'd like to propose that we go back to the stack.
Well, we're not technically running. We're technically not running the meeting on Robert's rules.
Okay, then could we go back to the membership?
How much time do we have?
It's simple. It's about
7 minutes.
Membership.
I want to give everybody who's speaking here the time to speak. I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay, so I'm just trying to do my best to make sure that happens. Do you have a point to make that hasn't already been made?
I'm just gonna say I mostly agree with Lynn. So that's it.
Great. Okay, so now we can go back to the stack. We don't necessarily have to end this meeting at 2, but I would like to end it as close to 2 as possible in the respect of people's time who are here.
Can we say like each question is like under 2 minutes in its phrasing, and then each answer is like a minute in its answer? Or take all the questions and then.
Let's just go.
Yeah, take all the questions.
Okay.
All right, but seriously, like a 2-minute cutoff, because a lot of questions go on.
Let's just take, sorry, I wasn't even following that rule that I said at the beginning. Let's take all of these as fast as, and so we privilege people who are speaking, and then if there are necessary points to clarify at the end, we'll do that, okay? And people can stay for as long as they can. If you can't stay, that's, we understand, okay.
All right, hi, I'm Melanie. I'm an adjunct assistant professor at SBS. I have 4 questions. Some are very small and some are larger. One is just the 3-year appointments for adjuncts that are now like changed from 10 to 12 semesters for reasons such as medical leave, basically. I'm just wondering if that includes folks who are primary caretakers and had to take care of like a child or something for medical reasons.
That's a good question.
The other question I have was, I read the language just now about student contact. It doesn't specify, for the office hour for adjuncts, it doesn't specify who students. So I'm just wondering if there's a possibility that colleges ask us to do advisement
That's a good question.
tasks that usually is expected of full-time faculty. The third question is if there was, during the bargaining, if there was any discussion on actually turning adjunct positions into full-time, which is similar to how other union contracts have it, as for instance, requiring departments to guarantee interviews when a full-time line opens up, or even making jobs full-time if a full-time line opens up. And the last question, the fourth question is like a larger question, which has to do with getting rid of the steps. And my concern is that I really don't know how the union and the bargaining team envisions the next set of bargaining, the negotiations for the next contract when we don't have steps and we negotiate a 5-year contract. What happens to adjuncts at that point?
Okay, I'm writing all the questions down in case we miss them. So we're moving on now to Jerry.
Hi, Jerry. I'm on the PO Labor Management Committee that does salary differentials, so I'm going to address that part of the contract. I mean, I'm very happy with that the POs, that there was more money going to the bottom PO, the assistant 2 PO, since it's a title that really shouldn't exist. Everybody should get promoted to assistant PO anyway. But what concerns me is the attempt to make the salary differential more regularized. They do require meeting, but it still does not require that colleges tell you why you're denied if you're denied. And I'm also concerned that it's great that there was a pot of money that was allocated to help make it so that some of the schools that, luckily at the Grad Center, we haven't had people being told they're not getting it for money yet, but we have heard that from other schools. And the amount of money set aside, by my calculations, is only worth 57 salary differentials. Now, if you get this differential, you get it every year for as long as you are employed as a PO in that line. 57 of those things will be eaten up like in a year, right? So the $143,000 pot of money only gets you 57 to $2,500 things. So that's not nearly enough for the entirety of the CUNY system to guarantee that at the colleges where this is an issue, where people are being denied that because of funding, that's not a significant enough chunk of money to make up what is needed to protect those people who are deserving of that salary differential but are not getting it because of the money situation at their campus. No questions.
Okay, thank you. Jill is next.
Sorry. So I'm from the library, and as many of you are probably aware, there's a long history of lack of parity between Boston Library and other faculty in terms of managing time in which to pursue research in order to apply for tenure promotion, because it goes with the same tenure promotion process as other faculty. And in the last contract, significant progress was made. We didn't achieve parity, but we got close. We got more lead time. Now, with the change of 24 contract hours in the first 5 appointments on the tenure clock being switched so that it's only 18 in the first 5 years and 3 after, that means, whereas with other faculty who have a course load reduction, we have no workload reduction. So we are moving away from parity again, whereas all of the other faculty said that that change is evened out by the course load reduction. It is simply putting library faculty at a disadvantage again with respect to other faculty. But mainly my question is, were those involved in negotiations aware of that, or will we have forgotten?
Erin is next. Hi, I'm Erin. I'm an adjunct in urban studies and games, and I'm a 5th-year GCF and DAB. And I've got 2 questions. One with regard to this notion of having grad assistants, their teaching being put towards this kind of 3-year adjunct teaching potentially. We're required to do WAC our 5th year. Would that count as adjunct teaching? But my more important question, if you only have time to answer one, is could someone explain the logic between the office hour and why we just didn't get that money, which comes to 1,000 or so, what Rosa was saying, and just add that to our wage already? Because I would rather be getting paid a fraction for the multiple hours I'm already putting in and don't get paid for than to get paid for something that opens up the door to exploitation. Yeah, more. Okay, Chris is next.
I am Chris with the Math Department, GAD. I'd like to summarize what I think are the main reasons we should vote no on this contract. We as grad students and adjuncts in this room. The first is that the main gain for grad students is the extension from 5 years to 7 years is only potential, as Luke emphasized. it is up to the department and the administration whether you get it. And I think it's very telling that Bowen did not mention this at all in her summary to us or on the summary on the website, which makes me think that no one is actually getting these extensions. For adjuncts, the main gains are not gains. The 2% raises, which are for all titles, are not raises. The IMF has estimated that from now until 2024, the average annual inflation rate will exceed 2%, which means that these raises are actually paid cuts. The other main gain for adjuncts, 5.5K in 2022, that is, as we all know, too little, too late. Barnard will be making 10K by then. Fordham will be making 8K by then, and that's minimum. And then the other thing, as people have said, this extra hour of work, it's very unclear what it's going to be used for. And Luke said there's clear language that restricts what the administration could do, but as Jane pointed out at City Tech, the entire writing center was cut this semester. Students were told to just go to the English department and ask random faculty. This language leaves the door wide open for administrations to assign adjuncts extra work in this paid hour. I'm in the math department at Hunter. I can easily imagine my paid office hour being an hour of work in the math tutoring center. So I would just like to take a straw poll in this room, since I believe this is supposed to be a consultative meeting for delegates to be informed of our opinions. Raise your hand if you think your delegates should vote no on this contract at the delegate assembly.
Hey everyone, I'm Anna. I'm a fifth year GAB in English. I also work at Baruch as an NTA. I taught at John Jay last year. I study the history and legacy of youth and community activism around CUNY. So the first comment I want to make is that kind of like I think Elizabeth said, I'm someone who really wants to adjunct. My passion is teaching. I'm an NTA and I work 8 hours a week, and I feel that that is less work than adjuncting and pays far more. So it's simply not tenable for me, and I think that this is sort of an unstated assumption. Like for many of us, it simply does not make sense to adjunct unless we get 7K, and that's simply not even enough. The other thing I want to point out is that the people who are going to be hurt at the end of the day by this are our students. CUNY is a majority Black and Latinx. It's a lot of working class students who work many jobs. If we are underpaid, we are going to be tired. We are going to misserve them, and we're going to end up teaching at places like Barnard and Fordham that are predominantly white serving. And it's going to be them at the end of the day. And I think we should really be following in the footsteps of our comrades in Chicago and before that in Oakland, and support our students.
Okay, questions that I have pulled from the comments, please tell me if I missed any. So the question about 3-year appointments, would being a primary caretaker factor into the leave that you can take? Is there a possibility that the office hour could be abused in terms of having to mentor other people's students? I feel like that's not a contractual question because the contract doesn't say if you can or cannot abuse office hour, but it seems like it leaves, it's a question whether or not how the question of office hour is framed. Getting rid of the steps, how would that affect the next contract in terms of the maximum that can be achieved? And then there was another question.
The question was if there was, during the bargaining, if there was any discussion of turning adjunct positions into full-time positions by requiring departments to offer lines and open up.
Yeah, right. Conversion lines. Question about conversion lines. And then there was a library question. Yeah, I have them all written down about the lack of parity with other faculty in terms of workload reduction and whether or not library faculty was considered in the discussions at the bargaining table. And then in terms of the conversion from the GA to adjunct, would WAC hours count? But again, there's no contractual language around this question about the GA to the adjunct, so it's not something that I think that we could answer in terms of relating it to the contract, but it could just be posed as an open question, I guess.
We do these one at a time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything.
But there was a basic important question, right? But it's just why did the office hour kind of end up in there as the way of structuring rather than it just being up?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I haven't gotten to all the questions yet, so
I'm
I
sorry.
can't.
Yeah.
Some of the questions. Yeah, the logic of how the office hour, why couldn't that just be added to the wage? And then, Chris, did you have a question? No. And Anna, did you have a question?
No.
Okay, so those are the, okay, so you didn't miss any of the questions.
So can I just run through this, because some of them I'll just have answers to, as somebody said on the bargaining team. The medical reasons question, I mean, I'm just looking at the language right now. I don't know the answer to it, but I think like I'll get back to you. You should like leave your email, and I think it's interesting to think about like a strategy for that. So I don't know what to say about that. You know, there's all kinds of opportunities for abuse in the contract on this question of advisement, and I fully recognize those, and I think any attempt to do that, like we have to fight it. Okay. So of course the potential is there. There's a lot of potentials for abuse in the contract. In terms of the next round and the steps, like it is a decision to take away the steps. One could decide to put them back on. One could decide to jack up the bottom. One could decide to negotiate for all kinds of things. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion what people choose to do in the next round. So yes.
Just to clarify my question, because it wasn't a question.
Yeah.
Was, I mean, I imagine in doing such a drastic change, there must have been some idea how that changes the next round. I mean, I'm hoping. So that's the question. That's the question I have. Like, what were people thinking when they make that radical change? How would that have an effect on future negotiations?
Right.
You know, can I say more cynically, perhaps, than Luke, right? That the question of compression, perhaps, I think, probably was important, but you know what Barbara was thinking about was how to get the highest possible number that she could get. I'm not saying it was enough, right? But one way to do that was to sacrifice the steps, right? So she did it, right? Because she was thinking about what number will get through the DA, right? What number will get through the membership, right? I mean, this is traditional bargaining, right?
Okay.
She was thinking politically.
So I was trying to answer quickly. So let's so on the conversion lines, yes, it was sitting there. Folks may know in past rounds they've negotiated a couple hundred at a clip. I would say it fell off, but the thing about conversion lines is this: they're not contractually negotiated. They always come in management written side letters. So one could decide we want to fight for 2,000 conversion lines tomorrow, for example. So they're not actually a bargainable thing, and they never have been bargainable.
At CUNY.
Well, in New York State, according to our contract. So it is at CUNY. It is the restriction of our own contract. We don't negotiate. It's basically like negotiating hiring, essentially. So that's why they've always come in these convoluted side letters that are outside of the bargaining process. So yes, it was something that we discussed internally. There is not, to my knowledge, a side letter that's going to come out. But again, it's also something that one could negotiate in the middle of a contract because it actually isn't contractual in that sense. The library faculty, is that person still here? Oh, yes. So there was a logic that was used for the full-time faculty. I think no one would have entertained this management demand if it were not the case that we had just negotiated the course load reduction for full-time faculty. And so exactly what you said was the analogous thought in people's heads about the gain for library faculty that came in 2017, essentially, that people are keeping their total number of hours, a small portion of being pushed post-tenure, but that for the unborn, the kind of new hire that comes in, relative to past rounds of bargaining, they're going to have much more time in both cases, for full-time faculty and for library faculty, for classroom teaching faculty. They will both have much more reassigned time than in previous contracts. So that was the thinking. It may or may not have been the perfect thinking, but
so it is a re-divergence between library faculty, which means it is a give back. It's like a language about no give back steals again.
Can I mean, I'd actually like to talk to you after about the details of, because my understanding is it actually affects proportionally both, but I want to talk about that with you. I'd like to talk if you're around. Someone brought up the whack hours. Yeah. So I will say, actually, that is probably the reason. I mean, okay, that's probably the reason why that got kicked to a committee as opposed to solved in bargaining, because everyone was like, I mean, I had raised it months ago that it was going to be an issue to kind of linking them up. And so literally, I think it was the final hour and people didn't want to think about it. And they were like, all right, let's get this resolved, but let's get it resolved later. So we could handle it a bunch of different ways. I mean, basically, graduate assistants teach for 3 years if you have the 5-year package, so we should get those full 3 years of credit and bag the WAC year in my mind, like just pretend it's not there, and then you would start off, your eligibility would start off, you'd need 2 years of build up to get the 3-year appointment rather than the 5. But we need to like negotiate that essentially. So that was actually the thing you pointed to is the barrier to getting it done and the reason why it's like in a committee essentially. So
There's also talk about pushing the WAC to the 2nd or 3rd year, and we should use the committee for that, to put in our input on that too, because otherwise CUNY is going to do something unilaterally.
And then the office hour thing.
Yeah, why couldn't that just be
Yeah.
a straight up raise?
So this, I mean, all these numbers are political, but one way to say it is that somewhere between $50 and $100 million in this contract is outside of the pattern, right? It is that means that in public sector collective bargaining, everyone's getting these 10% raises. That's what's happening. There is a lot of money in here that is not accounted for by that 10.41, and it is complicated for the bureaucrats who negotiate labor contracts to deal with something being in or outside of the pattern. And so this was a way to, it is a productivity increase. And that's,
It's a labor increase.
yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right. A productivity increase. Yeah, that's right. So it's a.
It's to get more out of us.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the same
that's
way.
right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, can I leave? Is it okay?
I want to close the meeting after.
Okay, okay, it's fine. You should talk afterwards about where the
We just say, don't feel taken hostage of.